I want to thank you for coming here. My name is Mike Stout. I'm the National Director for the Isaac Walton League, lifetime member of the Battle of Homestead Foundation. I think everybody's familiar with both of those groups. And I'd like to thank the other sponsors, the Breathe Project, Food and Water Watch, and also the Homestead United Presbyterian Church. So, thank you. As we always do, when it's time to go, if you want some soul, you got to have music. So this is my prayer. This is dedicated to you folks in East Palestine and the surrounding areas. When you fall in the doggy dog, when looking out for number one won't do, when you're broke at the end of your road, the whole world is caving in on you, I think you need soldiers of solidarity. When you're trapped under attack, when all the vultures are circling over you, when you're in hot, hit bottom rock, the rays of poverty are jerking on you, I think you need soldiers of solidarity. When you're stuck knee-deep in mud, wiped away by a flood or a derailed train, when you've been burned, you got nowhere to turn, on the edge of an edge, getting ready to fall, I think you need soldiers of solidarity, not sympathy or charity, but love and solidarity. When all is lost and you've been tossed to the wolves of a system that don't give a damn, the only way we'll live to see a better day, when we band and join forces again. I'm talking about you and me. When you're on strike in the middle of a fight, about to crack, your back's against the wall, when you've been burned, you got nowhere to turn, on the edge of a ledge, getting ready to fall, I think you need soldiers of solidarity, people like you and me, soldiers of solidarity. They rule the seas, they're the powers that be, you'll never beat them alone, you see. The only damn thing that's gonna break these chains is when we band back together again. Talking about you and me in solidarity. You and me in solidarity. When we're standing here together, we can make this world much better. When we're standing here together, we can make this world much better. When we're standing here in love and solidarity, with love and solidarity, with love and solidarity, with love and solidarity. Thank you. Probably sometime about a year ago, maybe it was about 14 or 15 months ago, I started trekking up back and forth to East Palestine. And to put it bluntly, I fell in love with the people in that town, the activists in that town. And the reason I fell in love with the activists in that town is because I've never seen people that have been beaten down so bad, that have been screwed so bad, that have been abandoned and betrayed like they have, and yet they still stand up and not only fight for themselves and their family, but fight for their community. Those are my kind of people. And in the process, I met a young man. He claims to be a wise elder, but he's really quite a young man, Mr. George Thompson. George has been a chemist for over 5.5 decades. He has 21 books out. He's been an expert witness in probably, I don't know how many, over 50 cases. And he's the only person that got, let me put it this way, when he saw what happened, he's retired, just like I am. He's been retired for some time. And when he saw East Palestine play out on TV, and he saw the people get told, you can go back to town, everything's okay, everything's safe, everything's clean, he knew something was wrong. And he's the only person that we know of on the planet that went online and pulled the manifest for the Norfolk Southern train that derailed and analyzed it car by car. Not only what was in the cars, but what kind of toxic chemicals were there, what they caused, and especially what happens when they all get combined and set on fire. So with that, I'd like to introduce, he's a very distinguished elder in my eyes, and he's a good friend, Mr. George Thompson.
Good. I recognize a few people here on the front rows that are from the East Palestine area, and welcome back to a repeat. I'm very excited for those of you that are from the Pittsburgh area, because as I was saying before this started, when I first heard about this situation in East Palestine, my concern was for Pittsburgh, because I understood the prevailing winds from East Palestine blew southeast, and you're about 40 miles away. So the concern that I had was that, well, I'm getting ahead of myself already. Can I have the first chart, please? Usually I have them up here and I can run them myself. But I want to explain a little bit to you so that you understand what toxicology is. Toxicology is a very unique science that is a merger of chemistry, medicine and biology, and environmental ecosystems. And so when I look at a situation like East Palestine, I'm looking across all of that. I'm not just looking at the health effects, but I'm looking at what are the chemicals that were involved there, and do they produce the health effects that people are claiming? And when that correlation matches, you can say those chemicals cause those effects, and that's what toxicologists do. And as Mike mentioned, I've been an expert witness on, I think it's up to 56 cases now, and my job is to look at that equation. In some cases, like East Palestine, I'm also looking at the environment, but in many cases I'm not looking at the environment as much because some person is complaining about some personal injury, and I'm trying to see if that matches with what we know about those chemicals. And so the triangle at the bottom of the chemistry, environmental, and medicine, those arrows go both ways. They feed each other. And so if you go to a physician, he's focusing on your symptoms and the biological effects in your body. That's his job. Some of them are highly specialized and some of them are generalized. But it's not their job to know the chemicals. And it's not the physician's job to know the environment. And so I work closely with even more experts in each of those areas, because as a toxicologist, there are always people in chemistry that know more about chemistry than I do, or in medicine that know more about medicine or environment. But none of them can work that triangle in harmony. Next, please. And so early on, as I was trained and grew up in toxicology, the question the motivation was always to stay focused upon making prudent decisions. And the precautionary principle was something that I understood for a long time. That if it was a complex situation, which East Palestine was, then you err on the side of precaution rather than proving the detailed science. There's so many chemicals involved in East Palestine. I can't possibly say what caused this symptom, because there are maybe 100 chemicals that cause that symptom, and I won't be able to identify which one. But mostly in law cases, that's a requirement. You have to specify the chemical that caused that effect. And so the concept here was my background. And I can have the next slide, please. And so, as indicated on this chart, when this incident occurred on the 3rd of February, 2023, I saw it on the news like people all over the country did. And the question that came into my mind, and then I watched this every night on the news, that it was just continuing. And for a week, this stuff burned. And I thought that was pretty unprecedented in my experience, just that observation, that fire went on and on and on and on. But then, on the 8th of February, the evacuation order was lifted. And on the 15th, there was a town hall meeting basically where they said the air, water, and soil was okay, you can go home. As a toxicologist, I knew that couldn't have been true.
Will you turn your head hard to hear you?
Okay, thank you. And so, by the 15th, when they said everything's okay, and that statement was made by the head of the US EPA, I knew that it wasn't based on information. It wasn't based on data. It wasn't based upon science. It was based upon politics. And that bothered me a lot, because my career has always been based on data. In my expert witness cases, sometimes I support the defense and sometimes I support the plaintiffs. It's based upon the data. What does the data say? And so I looked through my experiences, a whole bunch of things that should have been done before that announcement was made. And from what I had in my week of watching things, and up until the 15th when the administrator made that announcement, I didn't know any of those things had been done. But he's saying everything's safe. Next, please. And so basically here, this statement here from the Boston University School of Public Health that I've found only recently, to me fit very much intact. So one of the conspicuous casualties in the war against the toxic chemicals is the public's regard for public health officials. And just to jump to the bottom, the departments of public health have become departments of public reassurance. So you have your politicians and agencies come out and say everything's safe. Don't worry, your homes aren't polluted, your environment's not polluted, and it's all supposition, not data. And the irony is, now that I've learned, is that during this same time, people all over the area were sick. Animals were dying. 43,000 animals died in the streams that run through the center of East Palestine. Fish, crayfish, frogs, they became sterile. But everything's safe. There's nothing to worry about. And if you aren't familiar with East Palestine, those streams run under houses, under the municipal building. It's very unique. And they were saying that there's no chemicals to worry about in those. Next, please. And so what I did with my suspicion, I went online to Norfolk Southern's website and downloaded their railcar manifest for this train. Their document. And their document included 9 different types of information, some of which may be too small to see. But the key piece of information is over here. They identified the status of each car. They also identified the contents in each car. So I knew whether it was a product or if it was a chemical, and what was the status in this preliminary manifest. And I knew it was preliminary because there were some things that were left blank. but I didn't know how accurate the information was, and I wasn't sure how to interpret some of the things. But in summary, there are 52 train cars in this manifest that were involved in the derailment. Most of the time when I read the media, it's 33. No, it's 52 cars that were involved in that derailment, according to Norfolk Southern, not according to George Thompson, but according to their document. And of those, they claimed over here in the status that 17 of those cars burned. Most times I hear a small, much smaller number in the media. That there were 15 additional cars that were called, in the status column over here, impinged. And I didn't know what that meant. Did they burn or didn't they burn? Does it mean that they were contaminated with smoke from the burning cars? I didn't know. And I researched it to see if I could find out a scientific definition of impinged, and I couldn't that applied to this situation. And so I said, well, I'll just leave it. I'll talk about burned cars and I'll talk about impinged cars, and we'll see where it goes. But today, I went to ground zero for the first time today, and was talking to the family that lives probably the closest house, one of the closest houses to it. And she was telling me that her and her husband on the 3rd of February, when they heard the derailment, they started watching the fire from their house. And they stayed up and watched it till midnight. And the train cars were burning all the way from their house clear to the end of the train. There wasn't a mix of burned and impinged and unburned and the way that the manifest said. She said there was just a constant stream of fire, and she showed me her picture of it. It looked like a red lace down that railroad track. And so the point here is that I started with Norfolk Southern's information. Next slide, please. And the first thing that I did, and I see this is getting really too small, but I'll try and make sense of this, is that the first thing I did is look at the rail car contents. What was in the rail cars according to that manifest? Now on this chart, all of this information on this side comes from Norfolk Southern. As a toxicologist, I went into the literature and filled in what's the acute and chronic and environmental hazards from that product or chemical. And that was to evaluate what was the danger of the train itself. And I'll just point out a couple of things. These two, if you can or can't see them, over here they were inert plastic pellets. There's no danger from on those cars, just inert. If I can see it here, and I can't see it very well myself, I think that says semolina flour. When I got to that one, I didn't know what semolina was. I looked it up, and it turns out it's pizza flour. Some special brand of flour used to make pizza. And on the toxicology of semolina, over here, there is a chronic health effect from the flour. Because it's dust. If you spend your career making pizza and inhale enough of that dust, you can develop an allergy to it. And that's the only health effect from semolina. Now, I point these out because I'm going to show you an example later using those same chemicals. Next chart. I won't say a lot about this. Same kind of thing. There were 24 different types of materials, chemicals or products, on the train and in these 52 derailed cars. And the difference in number is that there were multiple numbers of some of these products, multiple cars of some of these products. But I want to come down here and point out that the last one here are frozen vegetables. Whole carload of frozen vegetables. And as a toxicologist with all these years' experience, I said, that's no hazard. I eat them all the time. And so I put over here to be determined, because I hadn't researched the toxicology of them, and I'm sure that as a toxicologist I could find some things that are wrong with things like broccoli and those frozen vegetables that I don't like much. But at this stage, all I documented were the cars that were in and what the rail company said about that particular cars. Next chart, please. The other element that I looked at in toxicology, question is exposures and exposure pathways. In this case, we knew that those fires burned for the better part of a week. So that stuff's going into the air. I could see it every night on TV, and so could you. So I knew that that was one exposure. So back here, starting on the 3rd, but that went for a week. On the 6th is when they decided to drain and ignite the vinyl chloride. And you couldn't see the details, but there were 5 cars of vinyl chloride, about 200,000 pounds in each of those rail cars. So there's 1 million pounds of that one chemical. And vinyl chloride was a concern for 2 reasons to the people on the front lines, including Norfolk Southern. One is it's flammable. 2 is it's carcinogenic. It causes cancer and is known to cause cancer. Their concern with it was that one of the cars was increasing in temperature, and they were afraid it was going to explode and blow shrapnel over a mile radius around the car. And so what they decided was to drain the vinyl chloride. There are ditches running alongside the railroads, and they were going to drain in these ditches and burn them. Nobody asked what happens when you burn vinyl chloride. But that was the way to keep it from exploding. As it turns out, the temperature was not rising in that one car, it was low, it was decreasing. And the NTSB, one of their conclusions when they came and evaluated the situation in East Palestine is that it didn't need to happen. They didn't need to ignite it and cause that massive fire that went on and polluted many states, as you'll see. And so the context here is that those are 2 types of massive exposures. But then, after the 13th, now this is 10 days later, they start digging up the railroad tracks. Railroad company wants to get those trains running again. And they can't get them running until they get all that polluted soil out. And so they pulled up all the ties and they dug out all the soil and they trucked it out of there starting by mid-February. Because their priority was getting the trains running again. Again, by this time, they didn't know anything about the toxicology or the hazards of these chemicals. And the people that they sent to work there were told that there's no concerns, you don't have to wear protective equipment. And I've talked to an individual from Virginia that was contracted to come in and help clean that up, who's died. Nothing he can do about it. He worked for 5 or 6 months there in East Palestine. They told him specifically, EPA told him, that they didn't need personal protective equipment. And the net result is, when I talked to him about a year after the incident, that he was in such bad condition he couldn't work. He'd had a stroke, a heart attack, and his condition was just deteriorating. And so this digging up released the chemicals all over again. And then in 2024, they decided to clean up the streams. These streams that run right through the center of some of the homes and businesses in downtown East Palestine. And the way they were going to clean it up is they were going to blast air into it with such force that it would drive the chemicals out of the soil and particularly out of the residue in the bottom of the streams, the sediment. And so if that worked, where would the chemicals go? Back in the air, under people's homes, in town, and the wind's just going to pick them up and carry them maybe to Pittsburgh. And so here was a whole series, and they're frankly still doing this work, digging up soil and storing up the streams. And every time they do that, they're releasing those very hazardous chemicals all over again. So I lost track. I picked 4 exposure events, but they're probably 20 or 30. Because I don't hear about everyone they're working on. And so the context here is that people weren't just exposed on the 3rd of February. They've been exposed pretty much for the last 2 years. And some of the homes that we've been in and tested, independent testing, have verified that their soil on their property, the air in their homes have hazardous chemicals in it. In September, this past fall, I tested 3 houses myself for a physician in Texas that wanted to get some independent analyses, additional independent analyses. And this week I did 3 more. I just came from this afternoon, and for the first time, I experienced the symptoms that I've heard about for 2 years. I was standing outside of this house that's at ground zero, and she was explaining to me all the pollution in her backyard. She won't even let her kids go down and play in the grass. And about 15 minutes later, I had to grab a hold of my car because I had a dizzy spell. And that's one of the primary symptoms that people complain about. I don't have dizzy spells, but I had one this afternoon, and it was unquestionable. So the point here is that there are multiple releases. Now, the tendency is that you people from Pittsburgh are sitting there talking about the poor people in East Palestine. But those chemicals didn't stay in East Palestine, and you'll see that in a little bit. So when I'm talking about multiple exposures here, those are multiple chemical releases where the predominant wind direction is southeast. And part of the verification is that some of the people living in Darlington, Pennsylvania, were as affected as anybody living in East Palestine, because they happen to be in the wind direction where that blowing. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm just going to show some of these. This is very similar to the picture that I saw today from this woman at the ground zero, except that in her picture, this flame went all the way down the railroad track to the last car. Every car was on fire in her picture. She's sending that to me, and I might very well replace that additional with that. Next, please. Here is the large explosion, if you will, when they ignited. And to me, this is phenomenal because these are very high temperatures here. And the next slide, I don't know. Yeah, this is the one that really grabbed me when I saw this, because what's in this? The blackness, the gray colors, are carbon. It's incomplete combustion. So the chemicals that they were burning didn't completely get consumed in the fire. And I'll show you in a minute what that means. But I knew when I saw that mass that that is unbelievable pollution. And if I haven't said it before to this group, this incident in East Palestine is the worst toxicological contamination incident that I've seen in 55 years of experience. More chemicals, more poundage, the risks associated with it are endless. It's probably going to get into generations of health effects from it. Can I just go back one there? The point that I want to emphasize here is look how close these houses are. It's amazing how close they were to this train. Next, please. This I put in here because one of the things that the manifest was erroneous. Remember, this is a preliminary manifest. But Norfolk Southern said that the rail car that carried these electric vehicles did not burn. This is the evidence they did burn. So that should have been corrected, and in my presentation analysis, it is corrected. But you can see the cars are just charred, all of them. And these have lithium-ion batteries. Coincidentally, at the early stages of this, I was asked to reevaluate the hazards of lithium-ion battery fires. And gave a presentation out in Denver, I think, to an association of scientists about that. So I knew what this meant. And the kinds of chemicals that are released by lithium-ion batteries are highly corrosive. Hydrogen fluoride gas. Hydrogen fluoride is an acid that is so strong it will etch glass. And that's one of the primary products released when you burn lithium-ion batteries. But several other gases as well, not just that one. Next. Okay, Mike referred to this in his presentation, and this was a work of love when the inspiration came to do this, because I looked at every car in the 52 that were in their manifest individually, and I compiled the data that I had discern much of which is in their manifest. By color code here, all of those 17 that they said were burned, I made red. And all those that they said were impinged, even though I didn't know exactly what that meant, I made the golden color. And then, let's see, what have I got here? These purplish ones over here were all malt liquor, and those were not labeled on the manifest. I've since seen pictures to know that all 9 of those cars burned. And so I had to add those products to the ones that I knew came from the fire. And then there were some where there were no comments about the fire status, but others where there were comments but nothing about fire. Well, when I talked to the lady today at Ground Zero, I have a question whether this is really accurate. It was preliminary. I got it shortly after the event, so I don't presume that Norfolk Southern had time by the time I got this to analyze and correct it, etc. But when I went back to see a month later, the middle of March, I went back to get their updated manifest. There's no manifest on Norfolk Southern's website. They removed the one that I had found and hadn't replaced it with a more accurate one. So I've been using this all the way through because when you look at the pounds here, 17 cars, 15 cars, these other cars, the total pounds that were put into that plume is 10 million. What is that number? 300, almost 400,000 pounds. When you see that black plume rising, that's all stuff that's going up in the air. It has to come down. And where's it going to come down? Well, my initial concern was Pittsburgh. You're 40 miles away and you're downwind. Now, do I have data for that? No. Nobody that I know of has tested Pittsburgh. It's not even talked about. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you folks. And I'm going to assign you to be missionaries and go out and tell your community that you got a problem that you need to study and evaluate. Next, please. Now, this is the same 24 materials that were on the train, but now, instead of looking at what was in the rail cars, I'm looking at what are the chemicals produced when they were burned, when the contents of the rail cars were burned. And so I've got the first 2 here were those inert plastic pellets. And look at the chemicals that were released. Now that's not going to mean a whole lot to you necessarily unless you're trained in a similar science. But what you will understand are the number of yellows. The number of chemicals that were released by the fire that could cause cancer. So if vinyl chloride was known to cause cancer, and that was one of their big concerns. They needed to burn it. But look what you get when you burn it. You don't just get one cancer-causing chemical, you get multiple. And you have this huge amount of corrosive that's released, which would explain a fair amount of the irritation, the coughing, the headaches, and many of the symptoms that people locally experience. It wasn't appropriate to burn that train. Couldn't have been worse. Next slide. I have 4 pages of this, and I won't go into all of them. Here's semolina, the flour that produced the allergy in pizza makers. But look what you get here. Now, what you can't see probably are all the things I didn't highlight. But you're talking about chemicals that influence the heart and vein system, the brain, the kidneys, essentially every organ system in the body is over here to this part. I highlighted the chemicals, or the carcinogens, because that really bothers people to know that. And we've already had several cancers occur in the East Palestine area that are sort of untoward. We had a man within, I think, a few months develop breast cancer, a man. Now that happens, but pretty rare. And we had one within a few months after. And I think, as I remember, Didn't he have double mastectomy?
Yeah.
So he ended up with the other breast later. And so these are not emotional statements, even though I know they are. They are scientific facts. Remember, the facts over on this side come from the toxicology and medical literature, not my opinion. Okay, next slide. Let's go on down, skip this one, but just notice the number of carcinogens that I've highlighted. Keep going. Okay, I want to look at frozen vegetables. And this doesn't show completely because it goes beyond the chart down here a little bit. But these are the chemicals produced when you burn frozen vegetables. So ladies, be careful when you're cooking them in your house. The same thing happens. You release those chemicals. And it doesn't show all the way down, but these are the same kind of chemicals that are released by the plastics because they have the chemical molecules in them that produce these, what I call forever chemicals. And you'll notice that soot and ash, maybe you didn't notice it before, but soot and ash are on here. Everybody's familiar with that. That's what you saw in the plume. But what people don't realize is that those both by themselves cause cancer. But the worst case is that those microscopic particles of carbon, the millions, perhaps billions of particles that were going up in that plume tower, will have the forever chemicals bind to it. So you have the basic material that can cause cancer, and bound to it are a half a dozen or a dozen other chemicals that cause cancer, maybe different kinds of cancer. And that's what's going up in that plume and then distributing around the area beyond East Palestine. Next slide. So when I compared the two, this column over here are the chemicals that were on the train. This column are the chemicals that were produced by the fire. And if you look here, the numbers, the hazards of the chemicals that were on the train are all single digit. There are 8 chemicals that cause cancer, but chemicals or products that were on the train that cause cancer. But over here, the ones that cause cancer is almost 120. Wasn't smart to burn that. And so, but when you look down, all of these numbers over here, first of all, there's a much longer list over here, but the numbers are all bigger, much bigger. One of the intriguing pieces of information that I uncovered early on in this is that the federal government had workers go in there and check on what's going on, how bad is it. CDC sent a team of workers in there to do their evaluation, the Center for Disease Control. Their team came down with what was called a mystery illness, and they left. I don't think they've ever written a report as to why they left or what the mystery illness was, but they didn't stay once they got sick. These people in East Palestine, Darlington, they lived there. The lady today, when I told her I had a dizzy spell, she says it doesn't affect us because we're used to it. Their bodies have literally accommodated, but that isn't a good thing. Okay, next. Okay, this just illustrates how the stream literally runs through town. There are 2 streams there, and as you can see here, maybe this is a house, and that stream is running right under the house. And there are times when the stream is high, water elevation, it goes into the basements of those homes. Other homes, it's very close, it would go behind it. But this one I put in here specifically because it literally is under the house. And the municipal building, the stream runs right under the municipal building. One of the workers in the building, in the municipal building, told me that when people come in town to pay taxes or do whatever else they do in the municipal building, they cover their faces. The workers couldn't do that. They were in that municipal building all day long. Next. Now, this is my emphasis of the uniqueness and why this is an apocalypse. Is that in my background in toxicology for 50 years, over 50 years, I've studied the hazardous effects of chemicals, one at a time. When I was doing anti-cancer work, I wanted to know what's the toxicology of that one chemical. When I was doing marijuana research, what's the effect of that one chemical that's extracted from marijuana? And all my career, it's been one chemical. But I did work in some companies, like a fragrance or flavor company, where they have mixtures. You women maybe like, some of you like to wear perfumes. Maybe your husbands like you to wear perfumes. That's a combination of about 400 chemicals. Well, in my career, I worked in that company for 8 years, looking at mixture health effects. But in that stage of my career, which was about 15 to 20 years into my career, they didn't have technology to do that. So I had to look one at a time and add up the ones that were the biggest concerns to determine whether that product was safe or not. It was a large part of guessing. Well, I look back now and say the good Lord was training me to look at the mixture problem in East Palestine. There are no standards for looking at mixtures. No health standards exist anywhere. All of the health standards are for individual chemicals. State, federal, anywhere you want to look, international. And so the concern that I realize as a toxicologist is that if I'm breathing the contamination released from that rail car fire, and I don't care if I'm in East Palestine or Pittsburgh or Washington, D.C., if I'm breathing air from that plume, I'm not breathing one chemical. I'm breathing hundreds of chemicals. I've identified probably 200 to 300 chemicals produced by the fires. Those are all released simultaneously. What I don't know from the chemical side is I've listed here a whole bunch of chemicals, but what happens when they interact with each other? These I've identified coming from some of the chemicals and products on the train. But these are in a very reactive circumstance in that plume. They can react to create chemicals that I haven't even imagined. So there could be thousands of chemicals come out of this because of the temperatures and the stirring volume that occurs from that plume. So I have a real concern about this chemical stew. It's almost never talked about. It's always talked about one chemical and it's at a low level. Well, what if I have 100 chemicals that are at a low level? I've got to know what is the impact of the combination, not just the one. Okay, next, please. Early on, I was aware within the first week or two of animal deaths that occurred, particularly following the February 6th detonation. And one of the first ones I learned about were dead chickens. This woman had checked on her chickens the night before she went to bed. I think she had 5, as I remember. And she came out and checked on them the next morning. Not one of them was alive. How'd that happen? She lived northwest of East Palestine, northwest of ground zero, not southeast. And when you look at the list over here, all kinds of different pets. The one that I'm trying to get involved with right now is where they raised purebred dogs. And they had 116 or 119, I forget the number, of puppies that died. They also had a puppy born with 2 heads. And so from toxicology viewpoint, this is a standard principle. My original research was in animals to forecast what I could expect to see in humans, or physicians could expect to see in humans. This is a foretelling of what's going on in the people. So we say that no people died. They didn't, that I know of at the time, but there sure were a lot of animals. Next, please. So I'm going to go through some of these fairly quickly because I just want to show here that one of the primary concerns was irritation and corrosion of skin, eye, nose, throat, and lungs. Many people complain of that. These are the chemicals that I've identified from the fire that cause that series of symptoms. It's not just one. Next, please. Same thing here. I've identified 20 different types of cancer that the chemicals that burn can produce. And the primary thing here is that look at the nose and nasopharynx and lung, which you're going to have when you're breathing these chemicals in. Those tissues are going to be exposed, but look at the number of chemicals that can cause that type of cancer. And what I'll emphasize to you is notice those that have an S on the end. Aldehydes, benzene substitutes, etc. Any that have an S on the end is not one chemical. That's a class of chemicals. It could be 10 or 20 chemicals that could be produced by the fire. I consider it one chemical in my talent, but it could be many. And so this is the cancer concern. Next. Two underappreciated risks. Cancer-promoting chemicals and hormone disruptors. Cancer-promoting are chemicals that they know from their research do not cause cancer, but they promote other chemicals to produce more and more severe cancers. So they promote cancer, they don't cause it. And there were several chemicals that are released by the fires in that category. The others over here are hormone disruptors. And the hormone disruptors, again, I think all of these, I can't see clearly, I think all of these have an S following them. And the number in parentheses is the number of chemicals in that category. So you've got 17 different chemicals that can disrupt hormones. We've heard of all kinds of hormone problems in kids in the local area. Now, if I lived in Pittsburgh and my 8-year-old had a hormone problem, would I attribute it to the chemicals released in East Palestine? Probably not. But it may very well be. And so these kinds of fertility, infertility, early births, infant challenges of newborns are closely related to some of these kinds of hormone disruptions. Next, please. And so here are what I class broadly as neurological effects. And look at the list. It's a long list here of things that fall under the generic category of neurology. That's related to brain and nerves. But look at the number of chemicals and chemical classes that cause those effects. It's no wonder people were experiencing them in a relatively high incidence. Next. All right. Dioxins is one of the most toxic chemicals known, was released by several of the materials in the fire, including the plastic pellets, including the semolina, and many of the other products, released dioxins. EPA came out and told people that don't worry about it being on your soil or in your gardens because it isn't taken up by plants. Well, here's the data. This is a family in East Palestine that had garlic before the incident. And my friend Scott Smith took samples after and analyzed them for dioxins. And you can see for yourselves the change in the numbers before and after. I'd say garlic took dioxins up from the soil. EPA has come out almost every spring and told people, go ahead and plant your gardens. If I lived there, I wouldn't plant a garden. I talked to a family today who brought in truckloads of soil from outside the area to have above ground gardens. They don't use the soil that's native there, even though it may be rich soil, but it's richer now after that incident. I want to emphasize, I'm sorry, go back just a minute. I want to emphasize a couple things here. These are the cancers that dioxins can produce. I forget now, it looks like there's 7 different kinds of cancer, not just one. And I look for acceptable exposure limits. The only one I could find was the Food and Drug Administration. They said 50 parts per trillion in fish and shellfish. I've since found, just recently, in the last few days, found a number for the EPA that's about 6 decimal points out that they would say you shouldn't have in your soil. or water. And so the dioxins are really potent, and these are part of the forever chemicals. The lifespan, if you get dioxins in your body, they say that they'll stay there for 7 to 11 years. In your soil, they'll stay 100 years. Next, please. Now, this is from Ashley McCollum. Early on, she gave me her list. I reorganized it by symptoms, 95 symptoms that she had accumulated from people in the area that had, and I reorganized it by organ systems in the body. The key thing here, though, is I've said it once before in tonight's comments, there are no health standards for mixtures. None. So nobody really knows how to do that. And the plume contaminants here from incomplete combustion, I identified all of those as single chemicals. So the report in my own tables are the single chemical effects, not the combination. And nobody has looked at what chemicals could have been occurred in the fire itself from the fire products. Okay, next. I just want to emphasize to you people here in Pittsburgh, the plume sizes. This is one. Go ahead. This is another. This plateaued off because there was a temporal inversion, and it plateaued at about 3,000 feet, which meant it had to spread. Couldn't go up anymore. Go ahead. Here's a long distance one, and if I'm not mistaken, this picture was taken from Pennsylvania. So this is the area of ground zero, if you will, from Pennsylvania. Next. This is one taken from an airplane, but I have no idea what the dimensions of it are. How many miles it crosses that? But that's East Palestine's underneath that. Next. EPA did a test on June 6th, prior to the burn. And what they wanted to see is what direction would the wind blow the materials when they burn. This is when they were going to burn vinyl chloride. And they forecast it would go southeast. Southeast towards what town? Pittsburgh. This was their forecast. And so they decided that they were going to take samples in this area to see how contaminated it was. Next. This is what actually happened. They sampled here. The wind said it was going to go this way, so that's where they decided to sample. At noon, there wasn't any wind. It was steady. In the afternoon, the wind blew northeast. They had planned, their plan was that they would sample here for how much it was contaminated, and they would sample here as background. They had backwards. This is where it should have been background, and this is where it should have been polluted. They've never acknowledged that error. And that was information determined by another, what I call a highly credible toxicologist chemist that studied for the plaintiff's attorneys, and they wouldn't let him publish his report, and they didn't present it in the case. So it's buried. Next. The only thing in this chart is that I want you just to scan the highlights as much as you can and see how many times Pittsburgh or the wind direction here from northwest. But in this is a air dispersion analysis. I didn't do it. I just interpreted it and summarized it. That went 24/7 from the first of the fire to the end of the fire. And from this analysis, I calculated that it covered at least 8 states, not just East Palestine. The next. This was a published analysis that says it covered 16 states, not just East Palestine. Next. And so well, I'll skip over this. This is really in the legal arena for criminal prosecutions, but I identified early on a number of areas. Next. And so perhaps my last comment here is that there are a lot of people, Mike Stout being one of the key leaders here, that are working on this to try and get information out that's credible and truthful and puts a perspective on the problem. I think that's probably the last one. Yes. So the net result is, this is the first time you've been confronted with this information. And my question to you, I'm going to be open later for questions from you, but my question to you is, what are you going to do about the information you got tonight? You're going to go home and forget it? Or you're going to start ringing Mike's phone and get involved? It's important for you to consider, because this can be affecting not only you and your generation, but future generations. So I leave that to you to think about. And at the end, I'll be open, as long as you need for questions. Thank you.
Group of us right now, outside of the area, myself, Steve Mellon, and a couple of others, we watched what was going on and realized somebody had to come help these folks and work with them. And if you want to know what to do and what you can do to help yourself and help your community, I want to sum up with a couple of things here. Number one, if you listen to what the speakers were saying, information and getting the truth out is one of the main ways we're going to change this reality for you. Getting the truth out means two things. One, letting us know what you're going through so we can let the powers that be know what you're going through. Ashley's survey is critical. Amassing that information about what you're going through, because the argument is you're not going through anything. You're all just faking it. That's the argument. We know that's not true. We need to let them know we know it's not true. And number two, we ain't going away. Information is key. We need, George did a presentation. His presentation is about 40 minutes. We have that presentation online, just like you saw him narrated here with the slides. We can send that to you, and you can show that to your neighbors, show that to your family, show that to your school, etc., etc. Keep the pressure up, and the only thing that keeps the pressure up is the truth. That's what's going to change the reality. Number two, we've established some mechanisms to try to help people, because there's a lawsuit filed, but the lawsuit's going to take 3 years at least. So we got to keep people alive and as healthy as we can for the next 3 years. So what we did is myself, Robin Lesko, who is the sister you met in the back when you came in that greeted you, Steve Mellon, Mike Blonick. What we're doing is we set up a nonprofit. The nonprofit is called Ohio Valley Derailment Mutual Aid. And what we're doing is we're collecting money specifically to get to people that need help now. I don't care if it's help with medical co-pays, help with getting your electricity and gas going in your places where you live, help with getting a job, whatever you need. We have a survey, and it's called a needs survey. We can send that survey to you, and we're going to, because if you put your name on the list back there, we're going to send you the survey. If you got something wrong with you, or you got something you need, let us know. We've already raised over $10,000. We've passed out over $7,000 already. We're going to keep it up. We're not only going to keep it up, but we're going to raise enough money to get you relocated and get you evacuated out of this place. That's our goal. And I want to say one other thing. There's a lie being spread around this community that those of us that are doing this, myself, George, Steve Mellon, etc., that we're somehow getting big bucks behind the scenes or some nonsense like that. I read today on Facebook. I want to make this clear. We, and myself included, have not and will not take 1 penny. 1 penny. Everything's going to go to you. The nonprofit we set up doesn't have a middle person, doesn't have a bureaucrat running it. It's me. And all I'm doing is the money's coming in and the money's going right back out to people who need it. We've passed out over $6,000 already, and we're going to continue doing it. So right now, like Krista said, is I'd like to bring up some of the warriors here that are fighting this battle, both in western Pennsylvania, in the Darlington, Chippewa area, as well as East Palestine. These are the folks that I hooked up with in the beginning. They're the fiercest warriors I've ever met, and some of the smartest working class people I've ever met. I'd like to bring them up here and give some personal testimony.
I got was from social media. I got up and I told my dad who I live with, that there was a train derailment in East Palestine. I'm from Darlington, and about 5.9 miles away from East Palestine. And we live in the middle of the woods, but we went out on our front porch, and you could see the fire and the smoke through the trees. And obviously, as a mother, I thought, are we safe? That night, it looked like the sun was setting, but it was after 9 o'clock at night. My son was afraid to go back to bed. He was afraid that another train would derail or that the fire could get to us. Later that night, at about midnight, I learned off of Facebook that the firefighters were being pulled from the incident. And as a former firefighter myself, I figured, well, that's not good, because you only get pulled from a scene if there's a danger to your life as well. Over the weekend, from what I could see online, it looked like the fires had gone out for the most part. But come Sunday night, the incident happened on Friday. On Sunday night, I started to hear that people were being evacuated. On Monday morning, the 6th of February, I got